Andrew Luck, I mean, there's three elements, number one. I think the pure shock of it, the timing of it, and how it affects the Colts. Go ahead, buddy. Take it away first.
First of all, I completely get this. I get it. And it goes back to, something we read about a month ago. We didn't bring it to air. I didn't bring it to air. I think we talked about Andrew Luck many times through this, including a couple of those shows where you were in remotely from Salt Lake City. But we didn't bring it to air because it felt too personal. But he said something back on August 1st talking about his shoulder injury, where he was thankful that it actually happened. It was a blessing in disguise because it allowed him to reconnect with his wife. He had spent so much time focusing on football. I'm talking about his whole life, like from going back to high school to college at Stanford and then the NFL, his first few seasons where he was playoffs. He was constantly improving. You can imagine how hard that is. You don't become great by, it's going to be a part-time job. There was a grind involved with him being Andrew Luck, and it was to the detriment of, I think, his relationships. And he said this, and it was brief, and it was quick. He said it was a blessing because it allowed him to reconnect with his wife. He and his wife are pregnant. They're expecting a child, which is, I think, is his first one. And it's one of those things where it registered and then it was gone. And then when he retired, it came flying back to the front of my mind. Because I remember, obviously, being someone who retired early as well, had one of my best seasons. And when I was 30, retired at 31 that next summer. A lot of it was because I wanted to be with my kids. Like, my kids were asking me, Dad, let's go to the park. Let's go to the playground. AJ and Chasen, who are now 17 and 15. Let's go, do X, Y, Z. And I didn't want to, right? I was just physically exhausted and beat up and just worn down. And it came to a point where you just have to decide what's more important, continuing to, be on this grind. Yeah, you're making good money.
Sure.
But you're sacrificing something.
Yeah.
And I walked away. I was 31. I had probably exhausted myself at that age. Andrew Luck, as a quarterback, still has years to go. So it's more shocking because it's a quarterback, right? It's different for a running back who gets pounded or a linebacker or
who has concussions,
Exactly.
Yeah.
But for a quarterback,
very different,
who's largely all uber protected.
Except him. And Cam Newton.
Which may explain some of it. But
Ryan Grigson, who was horrendous.
It was shocking. BT, it was shocking.
It's the right word?
It was shocking.
It's the right word. It's funny. There are many different ways to react to the news here, and there was definitely a point in my life where I would not have been able to understand exactly where he was coming from.
Before you had kids, right?
Before I had kids, for sure. And I'm just nodding my head as you're sitting there saying when your kids, and they're 17 and 15 now, but when you wanted to really be there for the formative years, the bikes, when the training wheels come off, when they first learn how to run and really throw, and the mechanics of sport, and not just sports, but things to do with school. If I was, 25 or 30, I got married later in life, even if I was in my mid-30s, I'd say, man, how do you walk away at the age of 20? How do you leave the NFL? I get it.
Yeah.
If you're not happy, and I tweeted this out, I said, there's only so many ways and so often that you can manipulate the mind and the heart. And if they're not in sync, you have to divorce yourself from what was, I don't care how great of a passion it was, you've got to move on. Now, I said to Tiki before we came on the air, I actually think he's going to return to football. That's my opinion. Do you agree with that at some point?
I think it's a possibility. Now, the question is how long he's done. He's out for, right? If it gets to 2 years, I think he moves on to other things. Other things become more important. But if it's a year from now, he's settled, he feels
the calf's eventually going to get healthy.
Maybe. BT, I have no idea what the hell is going on with this calf. It doesn't make sense.
No.
Because let's remember what happened. Comeback Player of the Year from 2018. Had a fantastic season last year, returning from that shoulder injury. Finished the regular season mostly healthy. I mean, maybe nicks and bruises that come from being in a 17-week NFL season. He goes into the offseason, does nothing, right, except for a couple of mini camps, shows up at training camp, practices a day, and then is done.
It's the most bizarre. It's really crazy.
What happened?
I don't know.
Was he snowboarding? I mean, maybe. Who knows? What happened that caused him to have a calf injury that then turned into an ankle injury that then turned into this ridiculous, got an extra bone in his foot?
Well, confusion first.
It's confusion.
Was it skeletal? Was it soft tissue? Once Irsay popped in, He completely threw us a curveball. We didn't know what it was.
I agree. There's a lack of communication between player, coach, and medical department.
Yes.
And
it's been like that for too long.
You're right.
His last injury.
You're right.
Oh, he's coming back. He's coming back. You know, the one thing that I take away this, and this is probably, obviously, unfair to Andrew Luck. There are certain people, you just kind of come up with a mental framework of how you think certain people are when you don't know them.
Yeah.
We had him on the show once, you and I.
That's right.
One time in the 7+ years we've been together once. And he was incredibly cordial, incredibly humble, incredibly boring, and that's how you want your quarterback to be.
Absolutely.
That's not a knock.
Anti-Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, we'll circle back to him as well. It didn't look too good over the weekend. But I never, again, this is not a diss at all. I never viewed him as overly sophisticated. I know he's very smart. Trust me, I get that. He's a deep thinker, more so than I think we all thought, and he's cerebral. But I used to look at Andrew Luck kind of the way I looked at Peyton, where he almost couldn't exist without football.
Yeah.
And I think I was wildly off base.
Well, I think that's a great comparison.
You know what I'm saying?
It's a great comparison, BT, because everybody knows, at least if you've listened to us for a while, you know that I know Peyton's wife, Ashley. We went to school together at the University of Virginia. And she would tell us, like, and I've gotten to know Peyton over the years. And he was at, my 20th reunion in Charlottesville. It was awesome, man.
Sitting in the corner.
Oh, he was awesome. No, I won't get into the story.
Was he getting a little nutty?
No, he was just having some fun.
Listen, why wouldn't he?
You do what you do when you're at Virginia.
Hell yeah, you do what you do when you're anywhere. Have fun.
Exactly.
Don't break any rules and have fun.
But during his, height.
Or don't get caught.
Yeah, exactly. During his height, all he did was eat, drink, sleep, think, everything football. It was a grind. And there's a reason he was amazing. Because you have to know the ins and outs and nuances of every player, every coach, every situation you're going to find yourself in. And it doesn't just happen. It doesn't happen by osmosis. You can be the smartest person in the world, but if you don't put the time in, and that's not time at the facility. That's not getting there at 7:30, which is usually the earliest guy that's there, and leaving at 6. It's like doing it every waking moment that you're home and you're thinking about things and you're drawing things out. And it's a grind, dude. And I think for a long time, Peyton Manning was the exact example of who Andrew Luck wanted to be. Peyton never had the injuries. He got banged around later in his career when he had the neck stenosis and he had to have surgery. But, he was a Hall of Famer by then. Already won a championship. He was a stud. We viewed him as the greatest, manipulator of defenses in football history, maybe.
That's a good way to frame it, yeah.
He had already,
for sure.
He had already achieved it. Andrew Luck has been grinding through this really since year 2. Right, when he gets banged around and he has the rib injury, he has a knee injury, it was everything. And I know this from playing running back, which is different than playing quarterback, but I know it from playing running back. Once you start having to work at being healthy, it gets not fun. You know what I mean? It becomes a job more so than in pure enjoyment. And so, yes, he was headed down that route, but he got detoured because of injuries, and it happens to the best of them, man. The TD, Terrell Davis, right?
Yep.
And think about how great he could have been if he had played 12 years as opposed to 7. Blew up his knee against the Jets, I think it was, right? So
yeah, it was.
We see it happen to other positions, and we get it. We see it happen to quarterbacks, and we start scratching our heads saying, what the heck?
Yeah, not just scratching our heads. You and I have not done this, but many people, including people who played the position, really uber-criticized the timing. Let me flip that to you.
Yeah.
Do you believe he left the Colts in a bad... Now, you can only reconcile what you reconcile in your own... You can't speed up the process. So it might be unfair to levy too much criticism on his time frame, but it's 2 weeks before the start of the season.
That's baffling to me. But here's the thing, and let's not forget, because we can't ignore this fact. We don't know if he was going to be able to play.
He wasn't playing week 1. There's no way he was playing week 1. No.
He practiced.
He wasn't playing September.
You're right. The whole preseason he hadn't practiced. So, maybe that's part because he was struggling with this mentally and he didn't want to fight through it. Like, are you injured or are you hurt? Well, I'm just hurting a little bit. I'm not really injured and I don't want to do it. We don't know if it was that, but he wasn't playing to start the season. So Jacoby Brissett who is the immediate backup. And I got to tell you, one of the great benefactors of this is Chad Kelly, who's had a pretty good preseason. Maybe he makes the team. But Jacoby Brissett is who's going to have to take the reins now. Jacoby Brissett has been preparing to be the Indianapolis Colts starting quarterback for the 2019 season for a month now. Right, so I get where people are saying, oh, he left him in a lurch. He wasn't starting the season. You know what I mean? We kind of knew this a while ago. And so I scratch my head about the timing, but I'm not going to vilify him because of how this timed out.
Many have.
I know. A lot of them have.
Steve Berline had. Steve Berline crushed him.
I agree. I mean,
crushed him. I'll read some of his tweets later. Crushed him.
But when you look at it in a vacuum, it's justified, right? The criticism. But when you look at it in totality, it's we don't know enough to level that kind of criticism.
It's fair.
Good luck.